The Wendigo of Pine Hollow. I always loved the solitude of Pine Hollow. As a park ranger, the beauty of the untouched wilderness filled me with peace, but that changed one fateful evening in late October. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting an eerie glow over the towering pines. I had just finished my shift and decided to hike a familiar trail, hoping to catch a glimpse of the last few rays of sunlight. As I walked, the air grew colder, and an unsettling silence enveloped the forest. The birds had stopped chirping, and even the rustling leaves seemed to hold their breath. Then I heard it, a low, haunting howl that sent chills down my spine. It wasn't the call of any animal I knew. I paused, my heart racing, scanning the shadows for movement. Just then, a flash of movement caught my eye. I squinted into the darkening woods but saw nothing. Determined to shake off the fear, I pressed on. But as night fell, the atmosphere thickened with an unnatural dread. The wind picked up, carrying whispers that seemed to come from all directions. I could swear I heard my name being called, echoing through the trees. I stopped, heart pounding. "Hello," I shouted, my voice trembling. Only silence answered. Then I saw it, something lurking in the underbrush. A gaunt figure with skin stretched taut over its bones, eyes glimmering with a feral hunger. The Wendigo. I had heard the legends, tales passed down from the local tribes, but I never believed them until now. Panic surged through me, and I turned to run, but the creature was faster. I could hear its breath, ragged and wheezing, as it closed the distance. I stumbled through the dark, branches clawing at my clothes, but I couldn't look back. I could sense it, feel its icy grip closing around my heart. Suddenly, I burst into a clearing, moonlight illuminating the ground. I turned to face it, my breath coming in sharp gasps. The Wendigo stood there, towering over me, its gaunt frame trembling with hunger. I could see its jagged teeth glinting in the moonlight, and the stench of decay filled the air. I grabbed my flashlight, pointing it at the creature. "Get back!" I yelled, though my voice quivered with fear. The light seemed to momentarily stun it, but I knew it wouldn't hold for long. With every ounce of courage I had, I bolted towards the ranger station, praying I could reach safety. The forest became a blur as I sprinted, the sound of its pursuit echoing behind me. Each footfall was a reminder that I was being hunted. Just as I reached the edge of the woods, a sharp pain tore through my side. I stumbled, crashing to the ground, breathless. I could feel it hovering over me, its cold breath sending shivers through my body. I was certain this was the end. But as I lay there, something deep within me fought back. I rolled to my feet and sprinted towards the station, adrenaline surging through my veins. I burst through the door and slammed it shut, locking it tight. My heart raced as I fumbled for my radio. "This is Ranger Cooper." "I need backup. There's a Wendigo in Pine Hollow." Silence answered. My radio crackled, but no one responded. The feeling of isolation pressed in around me. I could hear scratching at the door, the low growl of the creature outside, taunting me. I braced myself against the wall, listening as it prowled around the building, searching for a way in. My mind raced, replaying the stories I'd heard, the warnings. "It's drawn to hunger," I whispered to myself. I needed to outsmart it. I rummaged through my supplies, finding a flare gun. I had never used it before, but desperation pushed me forward. I loaded it, the sound of scratching growing louder as the Wendigo grew more impatient. With a deep breath, I opened the door just enough to squeeze through, aiming the flare into the darkness. The moment it ignited, the forest exploded in a brilliant blaze. The Wendigo shrieked, a sound that resonated deep within my bones as the flames illuminated its nightmarish form. In that moment I ran. I could hear it thrashing behind me, but the light kept it at bay. I sprinted towards the main road, my heart racing with each step, not daring to look back. I didn't stop until I reached the nearest town, breathless and shaking. The next morning, I returned to Pine Hollow with the authorities, but the Wendigo was gone, leaving no trace behind. They dismissed my story as mere folklore, but I knew the truth. I had encountered the darkness that lurked in those woods, and it would haunt me forever. Now, every time I step into the forest, I can feel its presence lurking just beyond the trees, waiting for the next chance to strike. The echoes of hunger. I was a rookie ranger, fresh out of training and eager to prove myself. Pine Hollow National Park had a reputation for being pristine, but it was also known for its chilling tales of the Wendigo, an ancient spirit of insatiable hunger. I brushed off the stories as folklore, thinking it was just a way to keep kids from wandering too far into the woods. One evening, I was assigned to patrol a remote section of the park. As I walked along the narrow trail, the shadows began to deepen. A cold wind rustled the leaves, carrying a whisper that sent shivers down my spine. I shook my head, dismissing it as paranoia. I was just a ranger doing my job. As night fell, I noticed a strange stillness. The usual chorus of crickets and rustling creatures was replaced by an oppressive silence. I felt a prickle at the back of my neck, the sensation of being watched. I quickened my pace, wishing for the comforting glow of the ranger station. Suddenly, I heard a faint cry, like a lost child calling out. I froze, torn between instinct and duty. I turned toward the sound, heart pounding. "Hello, is anyone there?" I called out. The call came again, more desperate this time. I hesitated but felt compelled to investigate. I moved deeper into the woods, the trees closing in around me. As I approached a clearing, the cries morphed into a guttural growl, echoing with a haunting hunger. My gut twisted in fear. Then I saw it, a gaunt figure standing at the edge of the clearing, illuminated by the moonlight. It was emaciated, skin stretched over its bones, eyes glowing with an insatiable hunger. I stumbled back, realizing it wasn't a lost child, it was the Wendigo. Panic surged through me. I turned to run, but the creature moved with a speed that defied nature. I could feel its breath on my neck as I darted through the trees, branches clawing at my arms and face. The echo of its growl reverberated in my ears, a reminder that I was prey. Desperately, I aimed for the trail, my only hope of escape. Just as I reached it, I heard a snapping branch behind me. I risked a glance back, and the Wendigo was mere feet away, its skeletal face twisted in a ghastly grin. It lunged. I dove to the side, rolling to my feet and sprinting down the path. My heart raced as I ran, each step fueled by sheer terror. I could hear its footsteps pounding behind me, relentless. The ranger station came into view, a beacon of safety. I could see the faint light shining through the windows. I sprinted up the steps, fumbling with the keys as the creature's growls echoed in the night. Finally, I burst through the door and slammed it shut, locking it tight. I leaned against the wall, gasping for breath. My mind raced as I listened to the Wendigo clawing at the door, its growls a constant reminder of how close I had come to being devoured. I grabbed my radio, hands shaking. "This is Ranger Walker. I need backup. There's a Wendigo in the park." Silence greeted me. I tried again, panic rising in my throat. "Please, I need help." But all I heard was the relentless scratching at the door. Hours passed, and the creature eventually stopped, leaving me in a paralyzing silence. I dared not move, afraid that even a whisper would draw it back. I glanced out the window, but the night was dark and still. As dawn broke, I gathered the courage to step outside. The sun illuminated the forest, but the air was thick with a sense of dread. I saw claw marks on the door and tracks leading away into the trees, as if it had been waiting for me to let my guard down. I reported the incident, but no one believed me. They dismissed it as exhaustion, a trick of the mind. I knew what I had seen, but the world moved on without acknowledgement of the terror that lurked in Pine Hollow. Now, every time I patrol those woods, I can feel the Wendigo watching, waiting for the moment I let my guard down again. The stories weren't just tales, they were warnings. And I was living on borrowed time. Whispers in the pines. I had been a park ranger for 3 years, but nothing could prepare me for what I experienced that night in the heart of Pine Hollow. The chill of late autumn had settled in, and with it came an eerie stillness that seemed to blanket the forest. Most campers had left, but I was tasked with closing up a few cabins before winter set in. As I walked the dim paths, the sound of my boots crunching on leaves was the only noise breaking the silence. I felt a strange sensation creeping over me, an inexplicable awareness, as if something was watching from the shadows. I shook it off, focusing on my work, but the feeling lingered. After securing the last cabin, I decided to take a shortcut through a thicket of trees. That's when I heard it, a soft, distant whisper, like someone calling out for help. My heart raced. "Hello, I called out, trying to sound brave. The whisper faded, replaced by an unnatural quiet. I hesitated, torn between instinct and curiosity. The stories about the Wendigo flooded my mind, tales of the malevolent spirit that lured victims with promises of companionship before revealing its true monstrous form. I had always dismissed them as myth. But now, standing alone in the darkening woods, I felt the weight of those legends. I took a step forward, calling again, "Is someone there?" The whisper returned, more urgent this time, "Help me." Without thinking, I moved deeper into the woods. The trees closed in around me, the darkness thickening. I called out again, my voice shaking, "Where are you?" But the only answer was the rustling of leaves and the wind, which now carried a chill that pierced my jacket. Suddenly, the whisper shifted into a low growl. My stomach dropped as a wave of dread washed over me. I turned to leave, but the air felt heavier, as if the forest itself was holding me back. And then I saw it, a figure lurking in the shadows, its gaunt frame barely visible among the trees. The creature was tall, impossibly thin, with skin pulled tight over its bones. Its eyes glowed with a haunting hunger, reflecting a darkness that sent chills down my spine. I felt an overwhelming urge to run, but my feet were rooted to the ground, paralyzed by fear. "Help me," it whispered again, but this time it was laced with malice. It took a step forward, its bony fingers reaching out toward me. Panic surged through me, and I finally broke free from the trance, sprinting back the way I had come. Branches whipped against my arms as I fled, the growl echoing behind me, a relentless predator in pursuit. I could hear its breath, ragged and cold, as I tore through the underbrush. My heart thundered in my chest, and I felt as if the darkness itself was closing in. I burst into a small clearing, the moonlight flooding the area. I risked a glance back, and the Wendigo stood there, its skeletal form silhouetted against the night. It emitted a horrifying screech that echoed through the trees, sending a jolt of fear straight to my core. I stumbled back, desperate to find a way out. My instincts screamed at me to keep moving, so I darted toward the edge of the clearing, scanning for any sign of safety. I spotted a fallen log and ducked behind it, pressing my back against the cold, damp wood. For a moment, the creature paused, its breath slow and deliberate. I held my breath, praying it wouldn't find me. The whispers returned, echoing in the stillness, taunting me with their promises of warmth and safety. "Join us," they beckoned, but I knew better than to listen. After what felt like an eternity, the sounds faded. I carefully peered over the log, and the clearing was empty. The only sign of the horror I had just experienced was the deep scratch marks on the tree beside me, evidence of the Wendigo's lingering presence. Summoning every ounce of courage, I took off in the opposite direction, sprinting until I reached the ranger station. I flung the door open and locked it behind me, my heart pounding in my ears. I grabbed my radio, trying to steady my breath. "This is Ranger Martin. I need backup at Pine Hollow." But silence answered again. The night dragged on, every creak and rustle outside reminding me of the creature waiting just beyond the walls. I knew I was trapped, both in the station and in my own mind. Hours passed, and as dawn broke, I stepped outside, the light offering a false sense of safety. But I never forgot what I had seen. Every time I patrolled the woods after that, I felt the Wendigo's gaze on me, a reminder that it was still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the next unsuspecting soul to wander too far into the pines. The frozen grass. It was early December, and I was assigned to oversee a small winter festival in Pine Hollow. The park was picturesque, blanketed in fresh snow, and families were excited to enjoy the holiday spirit. But beneath that beauty lay a chilling reminder of the legends whispered around campfires, the Wendigo. On the first night of the festival, I noticed something strange. A group of children wandered too far from the festivities, giggling as they played in the snow. I called after them, "Hey, stay close to the fire." But they didn't seem to hear me, lost in their own world. As I approached, the laughter abruptly ceased. The children stood frozen, staring into the woods with wide, terrified eyes. My heart raced as I followed their gaze, and that's when I felt it, a prickling sensation creeping up my spine. Something was out there, lurking just beyond the tree line. "Hey, what's wrong?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. One of the girls pointed shakily into the darkness. "We heard it, Ranger," it whispered. I scanned the area, the dim light from the festival barely penetrating the thick trees. "It's probably just the wind," I said, forcing a smile. "Let's get you all back to the fire." But as we turned, I heard it, a faint whisper, like dry leaves skittering across the ground. "Help me." The voice was chillingly soft, almost childlike, and it sent shivers down my spine. I quickened my pace, ushering the kids back toward the warmth of the festival. As we rejoined the others, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The laughter around the fire was bright, but it felt hollow against the whispering wind. Later that night, I was on patrol, the snow crunching beneath my boots as I made my way through the quiet, frost-covered trees. The wind picked up, and I heard it again, the whisper, clearer this time. "Help me." I'm lost. My heart raced, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. I knew I should turn back, but the voice tugged at my curiosity. I followed the sound deeper into the woods, flashlight in hand, the beam cutting through the darkness. Each step felt heavier, as if the very ground was trying to pull me back. The whisper became louder, more insistent, echoing around me. "Please, I'm so cold." I reached a clearing, my breath visible in the frigid air. The snow sparkled under the moonlight, but the beauty was marred by the presence that loomed before me. It was tall and emaciated, with skin stretched taut over its bones. The creature's eyes glowed a sickly yellow, filled with an insatiable hunger. I stumbled back, realizing I was face to face with the Wendigo. It opened its mouth, and the voice I had heard came pouring out, twisted and distorted. "Help me! Join me!" My instincts screamed at me to run, but fear rooted me in place. I had heard the tales, how the Wendigo lured its victims with promises of safety before revealing its true nature. I knew better than to trust the voice. With a surge of adrenaline, I turned and fled, heart pounding in my chest. The crunch of snow beneath my boots was deafening as I sprinted back towards the festival, the creature's growls echoing behind me. I could feel its presence, cold and malevolent, pursuing me through the trees. I burst back into the warm glow of the festival, gasping for breath. The laughter and chatter of families surrounded me, but I couldn't shake the feeling of dread. I glanced back at the woods, the darkness swallowing any sign of the creature. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake in the ranger station, listening to the wind howling outside, filled with the echoes of the whispers. I knew the Wendigo was still out there, lurking just beyond the trees, waiting for the moment I let my guard down. As dawn broke, I'd gathered my courage and returned to the spot where I had encountered the creature. But the clearing was empty, the snow untouched, as if nothing had happened. Yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was still watching me, waiting for the next opportunity to strike. From that day on, every time I ventured into those woods, I felt the cold breath of the Wendigo on my neck, a constant reminder that some legends are all too real and hunger never truly fades. The Night Watch. As the winter solstice approached, I was stationed in Pine Hollow, tasked with ensuring the park was safe during the quietest time of year. Snow blanketed the ground, muffling sound and creating a serene yet eerie atmosphere. Most of the visitors had left, leaving only a few hardy souls who were eager to embrace the solitude. One night, while patrolling the northern trail, I felt a strange sensation wash over me. The air grew colder, and an unsettling stillness settled in. I brushed it off as the cold and continued my rounds, but the unease gnawed at me. That's when I heard it, a soft, haunting melody carried on the wind. I stopped, straining to listen. It was almost beautiful, a lullaby that seemed to beckon me deeper into the forest. "Help me," it whispered, and my heart raced. I knew the legends. The Wendigo was said to use sweet voices to lure unsuspecting victims, and I had always dismissed those stories as mere campfire tales. But here I was, alone in the woods, hearing that very call. Shaking off the dread, I cautiously moved toward the sound. The trees loomed like silent sentinels, their branches swaying gently as if warning me to turn back. The melody grew louder, weaving through the night like a siren song. "Help me," it called again, this time sharper, more desperate. I pushed forward, adrenaline surging through my veins. As I reached a small clearing, I saw it, a gaunt figure standing in the shadows. It was skeletal, its skin a sickly gray stretched over sharp bones, eyes glowing with an unnatural hunger. Frozen in terror, I realized what I was facing. The Wendigo. Its presence was suffocating, a weight that pressed down on my chest. I took a step back, but the creature seemed to sense my fear. It opened its mouth, and that same haunting voice emerged, twisted and contorted. "Join me." I stumbled, instinctively turning to run, but the snow crunched beneath me, echoing in the silence. The Wendigo lunged, its long, bony fingers reaching for me. I sprinted back into the trees, heart racing, breath coming in panicked gasps. Branches clawed at my jacket as I ran, the growls of the Wendigo echoing in the night. "You cannot escape," it taunted, its voice a chilling whisper that seemed to come from everywhere at once. I darted through the trees, pushing myself harder than I ever had before. I could feel its cold breath behind me, a predator closing in on its prey. Just as I thought I was gaining ground, I tripped over a hidden root and fell face first into the snow. Desperation fueled me. I scrambled to my feet, but it was right there, looming over me, its hollow eyes filled with a twisted hunger. "Help me, join me," it whispered again, but this time I could see the truth behind the lies. With a surge of adrenaline, I turned and ran, finally breaking through the trees into the open area near the ranger station. I slammed the door behind me and locked it tight, gasping for breath as I leaned against the wall, shaking. I grabbed my radio, hands trembling. "This is Ranger Blake. I need backup immediately. There's a Wendigo in the woods." Silence met my frantic plea. I checked the time, midnight. My heart sank. No one would be out there until morning. Hours crawled by as I listened to the wind howl outside, each gust sounding like a voice calling out to me. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I peeked out the window, but the darkness was impenetrable. Just before dawn, I heard a soft knock on the door. "Help me." The voice called, chillingly familiar. I froze, terror gripping me. It sounded just like the melody I had heard in the woods. "Go away," I shouted, my voice trembling. But the knocking continued, persistent and unnerving. "Let me in." With the first light of dawn, I gathered my courage and opened the door. There was nothing there, only the remnants of the night, cold and empty. But I could still feel its presence, lingering in the air like a bad dream. As the sun rose, I reported the incident to my superiors, but they dismissed my claims. "It's just the stress of the job," they said. "You'll adjust." But I knew better. I had faced the Wendigo, and it was still out there, biding its time, waiting for the night when I would be too weary to resist its call. Now, every winter night in Pine Hollow feels different. The whispers of the Wendigo haunt my dreams, and every time I hear the wind howl, I can't help but wonder if it's calling for me again. The last hike. I had always loved the mountains, the solitude they offered. As a park ranger in Pine Hollow, I cherished my quiet hikes through the snow-covered trails, away from the bustle of everyday life. But that peace was shattered one frigid evening in January. It started as an ordinary patrol. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the landscape. I felt invigorated, breathing in the crisp, cold air, but a strange unease began to settle in. It was an oppressive silence, as if the forest was holding its breath. As I trekked deeper into the woods, I heard a faint whisper on the wind. "Help me." It was soft, almost melodic, but it sent a shiver down my spine. I paused, glancing around, convinced I was imagining things. But then I heard it again, clearer this time. "Help me. I'm lost." Against my better judgment, I followed the sound. The snow crunched under my boots as I moved cautiously, heart pounding. I remembered the stories of the Wendigo, how it lured its victims with desperate cries, preying on their empathy. I stepped into a clearing, and there it was, a figure standing between the trees, its back turned to me. It was thin, impossibly so, shrouded in shadows. My stomach nodded as I called out, "Hello? Are you okay?" The figure turned slowly, revealing a face that was more bone than flesh, hollow eyes staring at me with an unsettling hunger. It opened its mouth, but instead of words, a low, guttural growl escaped. "Help me! Join me!" Panic surged through me. I stumbled back, recognizing the creature from the legends. "The Wendigo! Get away!" I shouted, turning to run. The branches clawed at my arms as I sprinted back down the path, heart racing. I could hear it behind me, its breath a cold wind against my neck. "You cannot escape," it hissed, the voice echoing in the dark. I pushed myself harder, desperate to reach the safety of the ranger station. As I broke through the tree line, I could see the glow of the station's lights. I threw open the door and slammed it shut, locking it tight. My chest heaved as I leaned against the wall, trying to catch my breath. I grabbed my radio, hands shaking. "This is Ranger Thompson. I need backup. There's a Wendigo out there," but only static greeted me. Panic gnawed at me. I was completely isolated. The night stretched on, filled with the sounds of the wind and the haunting echoes of the Wendigo outside. I could hear it scratching at the door, low growls reverberating through the walls. "Let me in," it whispered, its voice a twisted reflection of the cries I had heard. As dawn approached, I gathered my courage and peeked out the window. The woods were empty, the snow undisturbed, but I knew better than to let my guard down. The Wendigo was clever. It could wait for days, biding its time. Finally, the sun broke over the horizon, casting light into the forest. I ventured outside, determined to find evidence of what had happened. But the clearing where I had seen it was barren, devoid of any signs. The only remnants were my footprints, leading to the ranger station and back. Days passed, but I could not shake the encounter from my mind. I reported my experience, but the others brushed it off as a trick of the mind, exhaustion from long hours. I tried to convince myself they were right, but deep down I knew what I had faced. Every night after, I found myself listening for the whispers, the scratching at the door. It became an obsession, a haunting fear that refused to let go. The Wendigo was out there, watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. Then, one particularly frigid night, I heard it again, a soft, desperate whisper. "Help me!" My heart raced. I recognized the voice, but it was different this time. "Help me! I'm so hungry." I gripped my flashlight, stepping cautiously to the door. "Who's there?" I called, trying to keep my voice steady, but the only answer was a low growl, echoing in the darkness. The scratching started again, more persistent this time. "Let me in. Join me." I knew then that the Wendigo was trying to manipulate me, preying on my fear and empathy. It wanted me to open the door. With a surge of determination, I turned away from the door, knowing I could not give in. I barricaded it with furniture, my heart pounding in my chest as I prepared for the long night ahead. Hours passed, but the whispers persisted, becoming increasingly frantic. "Help me! I'm so cold, so hungry." The voice was agonizing, a twisted plea that dug into my soul. I fought against the despair, reminding myself of the legends. I couldn't let it win. As dawn broke, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. I had made it through the night, but as I looked outside, the forest seemed to watch me. I could still feel its presence, lurking just beyond the trees. From that day on carried the weight of my encounter with the Wendigo. The whispers haunted my dreams, reminding me that it was always out there, waiting for the moment when I would falter. Shadows in the snow. As a park ranger, I was trained to be cautious, but nothing could prepare me for the dread that settled over Pine Hollow that winter. The air was biting cold, and the snow had fallen thick, covering the trails and muffling the sounds of the forest. I had always loved the quiet of winter, but this year something felt different. One evening, I was called to investigate a series of strange occurrences reported by campers. They spoke of unsettling whispers echoing through the trees and shadows moving just beyond the firelight. The stories were dismissed as tall tales until I heard them myself. As I patrolled the area, the wind howled, and I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. I brushed it off, focusing on my task. But then, just as I was about to head back, I heard it, a soft, desperate voice drifting on the wind. "Help me!" My heart raced. I glanced around, but the forest was still, the only movement coming from the swirling snow. "Hello?" I called, trying to sound brave. "Is anyone there?" The voice returned, clearer this time, almost melodic. "Help me! I'm lost." I knew I should turn back, that I was being drawn into a trap, but something compelled me to follow the sound. I moved cautiously, the snow crunching underfoot as I ventured deeper into the woods. The whispers grew louder, swirling around me like a storm. "Help me," they pleaded. I felt a tug of sympathy, a gnawing feeling that someone truly needed my assistance. But in the back of my mind, I remembered the legends of the Wendigo, the malevolent spirit that lured its victims with promises of safety. As I reached a clearing, I froze. The figure stood there, thin and emaciated, almost blending into the shadows. Its eyes glowed faintly, filled with an unholy hunger. It turned slowly to face me, and I recognized the horror I had stumbled upon. The Wendigo. "Join me," it whispered, a voice that resonated with desperation yet dripped with malice. My instincts screamed at me to run. I turned, sprinting back the way I had come, the sound of its growls echoing in my ears. "You cannot escape," it howled, its voice a chilling echo that seemed to come from all directions. I burst through the trees and into the open space near the ranger station, my heart racing. I locked the door behind me, breathing heavily as I leaned against the wall. The whispers outside grew fainter, but I knew the danger wasn't over. That night, I barely slept, my mind racing with the encounter. The tales of the Wendigo had always seemed far-fetched, but now I knew the truth. The creature was real, and it was hunting me. Days passed, and I continued my patrols, but I felt its presence in every shadow, heard its whispers in the wind. Campers began to leave, unnerved by the strange happenings, and I couldn't blame them. I felt trapped in a waking nightmare. One night, as I sat in the ranger station, I heard the scratching at the door again. "Help me. I'm so cold." The voice echoed through the cabin, and I felt a chill run down my spine. It was the same plea I had heard before, yet twisted, filled with an insatiable hunger. I grabbed my flashlight, my hands trembling as I shone the beam toward the door. "Get away," I shouted, but the scratching only grew louder. "Let me in." For hours, I barricaded myself inside, the creature outside relentless in its pursuit. It tried to coax me, promising warmth and safety, but I knew better. I couldn't let it in. I couldn't give in to its lies. As dawn broke, I ventured outside, heart pounding. The forest was bathed in light, but it felt colder than ever. I needed to leave to find help, but every instinct told me to stay. I followed my usual path, but the whispers returned, wrapping around me like a cold embrace. "Join me," they beckoned, and I stumbled, feeling the weight of their pull. I forced myself to keep moving, but the forest felt alive, the trees closing in, trapping me. Suddenly, I spotted a figure in the distance, standing in the snow. I squinted, my heart racing, as I recognized the familiar form. It was a fellow ranger, lost in the shadows. I called out, relief flooding me. "Hey, over here!" But as the figure turned, my blood ran cold. The hollow eyes, the skeletal frame, it was the Wendigo, wearing the guise of a friend. "Help me," it whispered again, and I realized with horror that it had been waiting for me to lower my guard. I turned to run, but the creature lunged, its icy breath brushing against my neck. I sprinted through the trees, panic surging through me as I dodged branches and stumbled through the snow. I could feel it gaining on me, its growls echoing in the stillness. I burst into the clearing near the ranger station, breathless and desperate. I slammed the door shut behind me, barricading it once more. I listened as the creature's growls faded into the distance, leaving me in a suffocating silence. I knew then that I could never return to those woods without fear. The hunger within. Working as a park ranger at Pine Hollow had its perks, stunning landscapes, tranquil hikes, and the chance to connect with nature. But that winter, a dark shadow fell over the park, something I couldn't ignore. It started with a series of disappearances. Campers, hikers, people simply vanishing without a trace. Whispers filled the ranger station, stories of the Wendigo haunting the woods. I brushed them off as folklore, but as the nights grew longer and the temperatures plummeted, an uneasy feeling settled deep within me. One frigid evening, I was on patrol, the moon casting an eerie glow over the snow-covered landscape. The woods were unusually quiet, the only sound being the crunch of snow beneath my boots. As I ventured deeper into the forest, I suddenly heard it, a faint whisper carried by the wind. "Help me." My heart raced, instinctively knowing what I was hearing. It was the Wendigo's call, and I had always been warned not to follow it. But curiosity gnawed at me, and against my better judgment, I stepped toward the sound. "Please, I'm lost." The voice sounded so pitiful, so human. I felt a twinge of empathy, but another part of me screamed to turn back. Still, I pressed on, the whispers guiding me deeper into the woods. After a few minutes, I stumbled into a clearing. There, standing under the skeletal branches of a frost-covered tree, was a figure. It was tall and impossibly thin, its skin stretched tight over sharp bones. The eyes glowed like lanterns in the darkness, reflecting an unnatural hunger. I felt my breath catch in my throat. "Stay back." I shouted, instinctively raising my flashlight. But the creature only tilted its head, its expression a twisted mockery of concern. "Help me! Join me!" Panic surged through me, and I turned to run. The woods erupted in chaos as the Wendigo let out a bone-chilling screech, echoing through the trees. I ran, branches clawing at my clothes, the creature's growls resonating behind me. I could feel its icy breath on my neck, urging me to move faster. I burst into the clearing near the ranger station, heart pounding, and slammed the door shut. The quiet of the cabin felt deceptive, as if the creature was still lurking just outside, waiting for the opportune moment to strike. That night, I barricaded myself inside, adrenaline still coursing through me. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Hours passed in silence, but sleep eluded me. Just as I thought I could catch a moment's rest, I heard the scratching at the door again. "Help me! I'm so cold." The voice, so familiar, cut through the night. I gripped my flashlight, peering through the small window. Nothing but darkness stared back at me. Desperation clawed at my chest. "Get away!" I yelled. "You're not real." But the voice continued, now a cacophony of whispers. "Join us. We're hungry." I held my breath, trembling, refusing to give in. I reminded myself that it was a trick, a way to lure me into the darkness. But as the night wore on, the whispers grew louder, and I felt a gnawing hunger deep within me, an insatiable craving for something I couldn't name. The sun finally broke the horizon, casting light over the snow, but I felt no relief. I stepped outside, determined to find answers. The forest was eerily still, the only sound my boots crunching against the fresh snow. I followed the trail from the night before, feeling an unnatural pull toward the clearing where I had encountered the Wendigo. As I reached it, I was met with a shocking sight. 3 of my fellow rangers stood there, eyes vacant, their bodies emaciated as if they hadn't eaten in days. "Help us," they echoed, voices hollow and desperate. The same words I had heard before. I stepped back, heart racing, realizing that the Wendigo had been feeding on them, twisting their forms to lure me in. The urge to run surged through me, but I felt the hunger inside me flare up, a dark craving for the warmth of life. "No," I whispered, shaking my head, trying to fight it. "You're not real. You're not real." But they stepped closer, the echoes of their voices blending with the wind. "Join us. We're hungry." Panic seized me. I turned to flee, the darkness closing in around me. I raced through the trees, dodging branches, feeling the creature's breath on my back. I couldn't let it win. I had to escape. I stumbled back to the ranger station, barricading myself inside once more. The whispers were relentless, clawing at my sanity. Days turned into nights, and I felt myself slipping, the hunger gnawing at me. Then one night, it happened. The door burst open, and the Wendigo stood there, towering and skeletal. Its hollow eyes glimmered with hunger, and I could hear my fellow rangers behind it, their voices blending into a sickening chorus. "Help us. Join us." The echo of despair. Winter in Pine Hollow was supposed to be serene, but that year felt different. An oppressive silence hung over the woods, and every shadow seemed to pulse with a life of its own. As a park ranger, I had my fair share of creepy encounters, but nothing prepared me for the growing unease among the campers. One night, I received reports of strange noises coming from the deeper trails. Whispers echoed through the trees, chilling the bones of those who dared to venture too far. I brushed it off at first, just the wind, I told myself. But that night, curiosity got the better of me. I set out on foot, flashlight in hand, the beam cutting through the darkness. The trees loomed like sentinels, their branches twisted and gnarled. The further I walked, the more I felt the weight of the silence pressing down on me. Then, just as I was about to turn back, I heard it, a soft, melodic whisper. "Help me. I'm lost." My heart raced. I knew the stories. The Wendigo used voices to lure its prey, preying on the kind-hearted and the lost. But something in that voice tugged at my heartstrings. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was in genuine distress. "Hello," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "Where are you?" "Please, I'm so cold." The voice grew clearer, more desperate. I took a hesitant step forward, despite the dread pooling in my stomach. As I entered a clearing, I saw it, a figure standing beneath the skeletal branches of a towering pine. It was thin, almost emaciated, with skin stretched tight over its bones. Its eyes glowed with an unsettling hunger. "Help me," it whispered, the voice a twisted reflection of the cry I had heard moments before. Instinct kicked in, and I turned to flee. The creature let out a growl, a sound that reverberated in my chest. "You cannot escape," it roared, its voice echoing through the trees. I sprinted back the way I came, heart pounding, the snow crunching beneath my feet. The Wendigo's breath was cold against my neck, urging me to move faster. I finally broke through the tree line and into the safety of the ranger station, slamming the door shut behind me. That night, I barricaded myself inside, shaking as I replayed the encounter in my mind. The air felt charged with malevolence, and sleep eluded me. Hours passed, filled with the sound of scratching at the door and whispers taunting me. "Help me! Join me!" I could feel my sanity fraying, the creature's hunger gnawing at my mind. The sun finally broke the horizon, but the light offered no comfort. I had to get out of the station. I needed to find help. I ventured back into the woods, determined to face whatever was out there. Each step felt heavy with dread, but I pushed through. I needed to warn the others. As I approached the clearing again, I was met with a horrifying sight. My fellow rangers, their eyes hollow, stood there, emaciated and pale. "Help us," they echoed, voices tinged with despair. "Run." I screamed, but they only stepped closer, their movements slow and deliberate. The Wendigo stood behind them, grinning as it reveled in my fear. "Join us," it hissed, its breath a frigid wind that sent shivers down my spine. I turned to run, panic surging through me. The whispers followed, echoing in my ears. "You cannot escape. Join us." The forest twisted around me, disorienting me. I felt the darkness closing in, the air thick with despair. I stumbled, falling to my knees, and the creature loomed over me, its hollow eyes burning with a hunger I couldn't comprehend. In that moment, I understood. The Wendigo thrived on despair, feeding off the fear it instilled in others. I was on the brink of succumbing to that despair, but I couldn't let it win. With every ounce of strength, I pushed myself to my feet and faced the creature. "No," I shouted, my voice breaking the suffocating silence. "I won't give in to you." The Wendigo shrieked in fury, the sound reverberating through the trees. I took off again, breaking through the tree line, my heart racing as I reached the safety of the ranger station. I locked the door and collapsed against it, gasping for breath. But the whispers persisted, echoing in my mind. "Help us! Join us!" Days turned into a blur, the nights filled with whispers and shadows. I lost track of time, slowly unraveling under the weight of the creature's influence. I knew it was still out there, lurking in the darkness, waiting for the moment I would falter. One evening, I felt a pull, a compulsion to return to the woods. The whispers had grown quieter, almost coaxing. I grabbed my flashlight, fighting against the urge to follow. But the hunger within me stirred, and I realized it was stronger than I had anticipated. As I stepped outside, the cold air bit at my skin, and I followed the path to the clearing. The Wendigo awaited, its presence oppressive and suffocating. "Help us!" The echoes filled the air, and I could feel my resolve slipping. Whispers in the snow. As a park ranger at Pine Hollow, I had always relished the quiet beauty of winter. The snow-covered trees, the stillness of the forest, everything felt magical. But this season, a sense of dread hung in the air, palpable and heavy. It began with the campers. Reports flooded in about strange sounds echoing through the woods at night, whispers that chilled the spine. I dismissed them at first, chalking it up to cabin fever or imagination. But as the nights grew longer and the temperature dropped, I started to feel the weight of their fears. One particularly cold night, I decided to investigate the trails after dark. Armed with my flashlight and a sense of determination, I stepped into the biting cold, the snow crunching beneath my boots. The forest was an eerie tableau, the moonlight casting long shadows that danced around me. As I walked deeper into the woods, I heard it, a soft, beckoning whisper. "Help me! I'm lost." My heart raced and I froze in place. I knew the stories of the Wendigo, how it used the voices of the lost to lure unsuspecting souls. Yet there was something in that voice that stirred my empathy. Against my better judgment, I called out, "Where are you?" "Please, I'm so cold." The voice wove through the trees, an ethereal call that drew me closer. I felt an overwhelming urge to help, the ranger in me pushing me forward. But as I moved, a cold dread settled in the pit of my stomach. I took a deep breath, trying to shake off the feeling. I was trained for this. I couldn't let fear rule me. When I reached a clearing, I saw the figure, a tall, gaunt shape standing in the shadows. It turned slowly, revealing hollow eyes and a mouth twisted into a haunting grin. My breath caught as I realized what I was facing. The Wendigo. "Help me," it whispered again, its voice a grotesque mockery of a human plea. "Join me." Panic surged through me, and I turned to run, but its long fingers reached out, brushing against my arm. An icy chill spread through me, as if the very essence of despair was seeping into my bones. I sprinted back through the trees, the wind howling in my ears, the creature's growls echoing behind me. "You cannot escape," it roared, the sound a terrible blend of hunger and rage. I burst into the ranger station, slamming the door shut and locking it tight. My heart pounded as I leaned against the wall, trying to catch my breath. The whispers had ceased, but the memory of its hollow eyes lingered, haunting me. That night, I barricaded myself inside, desperately trying to drown out the memories of what I had seen. But as dawn broke, I knew I had to warn the campers. I needed to keep them safe from whatever darkness lurked in those woods. I ventured back out, but the forest felt different, heavier, almost alive with a presence that made my skin crawl. As I walked the familiar trails, the whispers returned, swirling around me. "Join us. Help us." I shook my head, trying to dispel the fear that threatened to consume me. "Get away." I shouted into the void, but the voices only grew louder, more insistent. The shadows danced around me, and I caught glimpses of familiar faces, fellow rangers, campers, emaciated and hollow-eyed, their mouths twisted into pleading expressions. "Help us," they echoed, their voices intertwining with the Wendigo's call. I stumbled back, heart racing. I had to fight it. I couldn't give in to despair. With a surge of determination, I pressed onward, refusing to let the darkness take hold. Finally, I reached the main camp area, and the sun shone brightly overhead. I gathered the campers around, relaying my warnings about the dangers lurking in the woods. I could see the fear in their eyes, but I also felt a flicker of hope. They needed to know they weren't alone. That night, as I settled in for my shift, I kept the radio close, my heart still racing from the day's events. But the whispers returned, slithering through the air, coaxing me into the darkness. "Join us. Help us." With each passing moment, I felt the pull of despair clawing at me, urging me to succumb. I gripped the flashlight tightly, illuminating the corners of the station as shadows danced along the walls. "No," I shouted, fighting against the tide of despair. "You won't take me." The scratching at the door began, relentless and insistent. "Help me," it beckoned, the voice a haunting melody that threatened to drown me. I stood my ground, my heart pounding in my chest. I wouldn't let it in. I refused to surrender to the darkness. I could feel the Wendigo's presence outside, the weight of its hunger pressing against the walls. As the night wore on, the shadows grew deeper, wrapping around me like a suffocating blanket. I closed my eyes, focusing on the campers' faces, their laughter echoing in my mind. I remembered the beauty of the forest, the serene peace it once held. In that moment, I felt a spark of defiance. I would not be consumed. I would stand against the darkness. The frozen echoes. Pine Hollow had always been a place of beauty, especially in winter, when the snow blanketed the ground and the trees sparkled with frost. But that year, something felt off. A tension simmered beneath the surface, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the forest was watching me. I had heard the stories. The locals whispered of the Wendigo, a creature that feasted on the lost and the lonely. I had dismissed them as old wives' tales until I began receiving reports from campers about eerie sounds drifting through the night. Whispers that called out for help and ghostly figures flitting between the trees. One frigid night, I decided to check the trails, my curiosity outweighing my caution. The moon hung low, illuminating the landscape in an ethereal glow. As I walked, the quiet was almost deafening, broken only by the soft crunch of snow underfoot. Then I heard it, a soft, mournful whisper. "Help me, I'm so cold." I froze, my heart racing. I knew better than to follow that voice, but a part of me felt compelled to respond. "Where are you?" I called out, trying to sound brave despite the dread coiling in my stomach. "Please, I'm lost." The voice echoed through the trees, weaving its way into my mind, wrapping around my thoughts like a vine. Against my better judgment, I stepped deeper into the woods. The whispers grew louder, merging into a haunting melody. I could almost see the figure, a pale silhouette standing just beyond the reach of my flashlight. "Help me," it called again, a plea that sent chills down my spine. I stumbled into a clearing and caught sight of it. The Wendigo loomed there, its long limbs and emaciated frame sending a jolt of terror through me. Its eyes glinted with an insatiable hunger, a promise of despair. "Join me," it whispered, its voice both alluring and terrifying. I turned to run, but the shadows closed in around me. I could hear the creature's growls, the rustling of leaves as it pursued me. "You cannot escape," it shrieked, a sound that echoed through the woods, reverberating in my bones. I sprinted back to the ranger station, slamming the door shut behind me, heart pounding in my chest. I locked every window and door, my breath coming in sharp gasps. But the whispers didn't stop. They seeped through the walls, wrapping around me like a shroud. "Help us! Join us!" Panic gripped me. I realized I wasn't alone. I had heard those voices before, fellow rangers who had gone missing over the years. The Wendigo had claimed them, twisting their souls into a chorus of despair. Desperate to escape, I grabbed my gear and stepped outside, the cold biting at my skin. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting long shadows across the snow. I needed to warn the campers. I had to save them. But the forest felt alive, the whispers growing louder, more insistent. "Join us! Help us!" I pressed my hands to my ears, fighting against the darkness that threatened to pull me under. When I reached the camp, I gathered everyone around the fire, my voice shaking as I recounted my experience. I could see the fear in their eyes, but I also sensed a flicker of hope. Together, we could stand against the creature that haunted the woods. That night, we made a pact. We would stay close, supporting one another against the Wendigo's influence. As the hours passed, I felt the oppressive weight of the whispers lift, but I knew the danger was far from over. Around midnight, the wind howled outside, and the whispers returned, now a chorus of voices filling the air. "Help us! Join us!" The sound was deafening, shaking the very ground beneath us. The campers huddled together, fear etched on their faces. I could see the Wendigo's shadow flickering just beyond the firelight, its hunger palpable. It wanted us to break apart, to succumb to our fears. "No," I shouted, my voice cutting through the darkness. "We are not afraid." As if in response, the Wendigo let out a blood-curdling howl, echoing through the trees. The shadows twisted, and I could see the faces of the lost, their eyes pleading. "Help us! Join us!" But I refused to give in. I locked eyes with the campers, and we stood together, united against the darkness. The fire blazed brightly, a beacon of warmth and hope in the frozen night. "Stay together," I urged, my heart racing. We formed a circle around the fire, our hands clasped tightly. The whispers surged, but we held fast, focusing on each other. With every heartbeat, I felt the Wendigo's power wane, its shadow flickering as the dawn approached. The whispers grew fainter, replaced by the sound of the wind rustling through the trees. As the first light of day broke over the horizon, the creature's presence faded, the shadows retreating into the forest. I took a deep breath, feeling the warmth of the sun wash over me. The last campfire. As a park ranger, I'd spent countless nights in Pine Hollow, but this winter felt different. The nights were longer, and an oppressive chill seeped into the very air. Campers were reporting strange sightings and whispers that made their blood run cold. I dismissed it as paranoia until I found myself drawn to the woods one fateful night. The moon hung high, illuminating the snow-covered ground like a silver blanket. I ventured down a familiar path, my flashlight piercing the darkness. As I walked deeper, I began to hear it, a faint, ghostly whisper drifting through the trees. "Help me, I'm lost." Against my better judgment, I followed the sound, each step heavy with unease. "Who's there?" I called, trying to mask my fear. "Show yourself." "Please, I'm so cold." The voice was laced with desperation, pulling at my heartstrings. But I knew the stories. This was the Wendigo's trick. I shook my head and turned back, but the air grew colder, and the whispers intensified, wrapping around me like a thick fog. I could almost see the figure in the distance, its gaunt form silhouetted against the moonlight. "Help me," it beckoned again, more insistent this time. Before I knew it, I had stepped into a clearing. There, surrounded by skeletal trees, stood the Wendigo, tall, emaciated, its eyes gleaming with a predatory hunger. "Join me," it whispered, and I could feel my resolve slipping. I turned to run, but its long fingers reached out, grazing my arm with icy claws. An overwhelming wave of despair washed over me, and I stumbled, feeling the creature's presence closing in. "No," I shouted, pushing through the fog of fear. I sprinted back down the trail, the Wendigo's growls echoing behind me. "You cannot escape," it roared, the sound sending chills down my spine. I burst into the ranger station, locking the door behind me. My heart raced as I sank to the floor, trying to catch my breath. The whispers had ceased, but the memory of those hollow eyes lingered. That night, I could hardly sleep, haunted by visions of the Wendigo and the lost souls it had claimed. I knew I had to warn the campers about the danger lurking in the shadows. The next morning, I gathered everyone around the campfire. "Listen up," I said, my voice trembling. "There's something in these woods, a creature that feeds on despair. If you hear whispers, do not follow them. It's a trick." Some campers exchanged skeptical glances, but I pressed on. "We need to stick together, especially at night. The Wendigo will try to isolate us." As night fell, I kept a watchful eye on the camp, the fire crackling and popping as the darkness deepened. I felt a creeping dread settling over me. Just as I thought the night would pass uneventfully, the whispers began to return, echoing through the trees. "Help us. Join us." I turned to the campers, fear etched on their faces. "Stay close," I commanded, trying to sound more confident than I felt. The shadows shifted around us, and I could see shapes lurking just beyond the firelight. Suddenly, the flames flickered violently, casting grotesque shadows that danced on the trees. "Help me," the whispers called, now blending into a cacophony of voices, lost souls, fellow rangers, and campers who had disappeared over the years. Panic surged through me. "We need to stay together," I shouted over the rising chaos. But the Wendigo's voice broke through, more powerful now. "Join us." One by one, campers began to falter, stepping away from the group, entranced by the voices. I felt the pull too, a sickening yearning to give in, to join those who had been lost. I gritted my teeth, forcing myself to stay focused. "Look at me," I yelled, trying to reach the campers still near the fire. "We cannot give in. Fight it." But the Wendigo's presence was suffocating, wrapping around us like a fog. I felt my heart raced as I struggled against the darkness, knowing we were losing ground. Suddenly, the creature emerged from the shadows, towering over us, its eyes filled with insatiable hunger. "You belong to me," it roared, the sound reverberating through the trees. In a moment of clarity, I grabbed a handful of burning logs from the fire and hurled them at the Wendigo. "Get back," I shouted, the flames momentarily illuminating its horrific form. The creature recoiled, and I could see the faces of the lost souls swirling around it, their mouths twisted in agony. The campers regained their senses, stepping back from the fire, eyes wide with fear. We had to stand together. We formed a circle, hands clasped, focusing on the warmth of the fire and each other. "No more," I shouted, my voice filled with determination. "We will not succumb to you." The Wendigo shrieked, a sound that pierced the night, but the flames roared higher and the shadows receded. The whispers faded, replaced by the crackling of the fire and the sound of our united breaths. The howl of winter. As a park ranger at Pine Hollow, I was no stranger to the tales of the Wendigo. The locals spoke of it in hushed tones, warning of its insatiable hunger and its ability to mimic the voices of the lost. I'd always dismissed these stories as folklore until the winter of my last season. The snow fell heavily that year, blanketing the forest in a thick layer of white. Campers arrived, eager for the winter wonderland, but I could feel an unsettling energy in the air. Reports of strange sightings began trickling in, figures lurking in the shadows, whispers weaving through the trees. One night, I received a radio call from a group of campers who claimed they heard a woman's voice calling for help. I knew I had to investigate. Armed with only my flashlight and a heavy coat, I trudged through the knee-deep snow, the cold biting at my skin. As I ventured deeper into the woods, the temperature dropped further, and an unnatural silence enveloped me. The only sound was the crunch of snow beneath my boots. Then I heard it, the unmistakable sound of a voice drifting through the trees. "Help me, I'm lost." My heart raced. I knew better than to respond, but I felt the pull of compassion. "Where are you?" I called out, the words slipping from my lips before I could stop them. "Please, I'm so cold." The voice was hauntingly familiar, and a sense of dread washed over me. I had heard that tone before, my sister's voice, who had gone missing years ago. "No," I whispered, shaking my head in disbelief. I had to resist. I couldn't let the Wendigo lure me in, but the voice grew louder, more desperate. I pressed on, the snow crunching underfoot, until I found myself in a clearing. The air was frigid, and the moonlight illuminated a tall, gaunt figure standing before me. It was the Wendigo, its eyes glinting with a cold hunger, its mouth twisted into a grotesque grin. "Help me," it whispered again, the voice echoing my sister's words, twisting them into something sinister. I felt the ground beneath me shift, the weight of despair pressing down. I turned to run, but the creature let out a terrible howl that pierced the night, freezing me in my tracks. "You cannot escape," it screeched, its voice a chilling mix of anguish and glee. I finally broke free from the spell and sprinted back the way I came, the howls echoing behind me, each step heavy with fear. "Join us," it called, the voices of the lost swirling around me, taunting and pleading. I burst into the ranger station, locking the door and barricading it with furniture. My heart raced as I leaned against the door, trying to catch my breath. The wind howled outside, and the whispers began again, scratching at my mind. "Help us, join us." Panic surged through me. I had to warn the campers, they were in danger. I gathered my gear and stepped outside, bracing against the frigid air. As I made my way back to the camp, the whispers grew louder, wrapping around me like a shroud. "Stay together," I shouted to the campers who had gathered around the fire, their faces pale with fear. "There's a creature in these woods, a Wendigo. If you hear voices, don't follow them." But as I spoke, I could see the shadows creeping closer, the darkness pressing in on us. The fire crackled, its warmth a fragile barrier against the encroaching cold. Just then, the wind howled again, and the whispers surged, an overwhelming cacophony. "Help us, join us." The voices mingled with the howls of the Wendigo, and I felt my resolve start to slip. "Don't listen," I shouted, grabbing the campers' hands, forming a circle around the fire. "We have to stick together." The Wendigo's form emerged from the shadows, tall and emaciated, its eyes glowing with hunger. "You belong to me," it roared, the sound reverberating through the trees. I could see familiar faces within the creature's swirling mass, the lost souls it had claimed. They'd reached out with hollow eyes, their mouths twisted in agony. "Help us," they echoed, pulling at my heart. "No," I screamed, shaking my head violently. "We won't let you take us." In that moment, I felt a surge of defiance. I grabbed a burning log from the fire and thrust it toward the Wendigo. "Back away," I yelled, the flames casting flickering shadows on its horrid form. The creature shrieked, its body contorting as it recoiled from the fire. The voices grew fainter, and I could feel the warmth of the campers around me, our collective strength pushing back against the darkness. With each passing moment, the Wendigo's form began to dissolve, its howls fading into the night. "You cannot escape," it wailed, but the fire burned brighter, illuminating the clearing. As dawn broke over the horizon, the Wendigo vanished, leaving only silence behind. The campers stood together, shaken but resolute. We had faced the creature and survived. The shattered silence. Winter in Pine Hollow was usually serene, but that year, an eerie stillness gripped the forest. The kind of quiet that made my skin crawl, as if the woods themselves were holding their breath. As a park ranger, I was used to the whispers of the wind and the rustle of animals, but this felt different. It felt like something was waiting. It began with the campers. They reported hearing strange sounds at night, rustling in the underbrush, whispers floating on the wind. I brushed it off as wild animals or imagination, but when I started hearing it too, I couldn't ignore the gnawing anxiety in my gut. One frigid night, I decided to patrol the trails. The moon hung high, casting an otherworldly glow on the snow. With every step, I felt a growing unease. Then suddenly, I heard it, a soft, haunting voice. "Help me, I'm lost." I froze. The voice echoed through the trees, soft and pleading. I knew better than to respond, but the fear of leaving someone behind clawed at my conscience. "Where are you?" I called, despite the warning bells ringing in my head. "Please, I'm so cold." It was a familiar tone, one I couldn't quite place, but it tugged at my heart. A chill ran down my spine as I stepped deeper into the woods. I caught a glimpse of something, a shadow flitting between the trees. My instincts screamed at me to turn back, but I pressed on, heart pounding. When I reached a small clearing, I saw it. The Wendigo stood there, tall and skeletal, its eyes gleaming with a hunger that made my blood run cold. "Help me," it whispered, its mouth twisting into a cruel imitation of a smile. "No," I shouted, realizing my mistake too late. I turned to run, but the Wendigo's laughter filled the air, a sound both terrible and mesmerizing. "You cannot escape." I sprinted through the snow, the darkness closing in around me. The whispers morphed into a chorus of voices, those who had disappeared in these woods. "Help us! Join us!" My heart raced as I pushed through the underbrush, desperate to escape the creature's grasp. I stumbled into the ranger station, locking the door behind me, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The wind howled outside, but the whispers persisted, clawing at my sanity. "Join us," the voices called, now more insistent. I sank to the floor, my back against the wall, trying to drown out the cacophony. I couldn't let it in. Hours passed, and just when I thought I was safe, I heard a knock on the door. "Help me." The voice was soft and pleading, echoing from outside. I knew it was a trap. The Wendigo was trying to lure me out. I gripped my flashlight, scanning the room for something, anything that could help. Just then, I heard it again, louder this time. "Let me in. I'm freezing." In a moment of desperation, I rushed to the window, pulling back the curtain. My heart dropped. Standing outside was a figure, emaciated, eyes hollow and mouth twisted into a semblance of my own face. "Please, I'm so cold." I stumbled back, my breath hitching. It was like looking into a mirror, a reflection of what I could become. "No." I shouted, shaking my head. "You're not real." But the figure pressed closer, its voice a chilling echo of my own. "Help me. Join me." I turned and grabbed a heavy chair, slamming it against the door, barricading myself. The howls grew louder, a windstorm of despair swirling outside. The voices rose in pitch, a terrifying symphony of the lost. "Join us. Help us." In that moment, I felt the weight of their suffering and my heart wavered. But I remembered the campers, the ones I needed to protect. I couldn't let the Wendigo claim me. Gathering all my strength, I called out, "You can't have me. I'm not yours." My voice echoed through the room, and for a moment, the howling stopped. But the silence was short-lived. The Wendigo's laughter returned, a cold, hollow sound that sent shivers down my spine. "You are already mine." I took a deep breath, my mind racing. I needed a distraction, something to draw its attention away. I grabbed the lantern from the table and threw it against the wall. The glass shattered, flames erupting as fire lit up the room. The Wendigo shrieked, and the shadows recoiled, the figures of the lost souls dissipating into the smoke. I could hear the desperation in their voices fading as the flames grew, illuminating the corners of the room. "Fight it!" I shouted into the darkness, my heart pounding. "We are not afraid." As the fire spread, the Wendigo let out a final, anguished howl before vanishing into the shadows. The warmth of the flames pushed back the chill that had settled in my bones, and I felt the oppressive weight of despair lift. I rushed to the door, throwing it open to see the first light of dawn breaking through the trees. The forest was silent now, the whispers gone. The forgotten trail. The winter in Pine Hollow had a beauty that belied its danger. Snowflakes fell like whispered secrets, blanketing the forest in a stearine-white shroud. As a park ranger, I often roamed these woods, but that season felt different. There was a stillness in the air, a weight that pressed against my chest. One evening, while checking on the trails, I stumbled across an old, forgotten path, overgrown and hidden beneath layers of snow. Curiosity pulled me in. I had never seen this trail before. It felt like it had been waiting for someone to find it. The branches twisted overhead, creating a natural archway, beckoning me deeper into the woods. As I ventured further, the temperature dropped and an unnatural chill settled around me. The silence was deafening, broken only by the crunch of my boots in the snow. Then I heard it, a soft, mournful whisper drifting through the trees. "Help me. I'm lost." I froze, heart pounding. The voice was delicate, almost familiar. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice trembling against the cold. "Show yourself." "Please. I'm so cold," the voice echoed, twisting in the air. My instincts screamed at me to turn back, but I felt compelled to follow the sound. The trail narrowed, and soon I reached a small clearing. There, standing beneath the gnarled branches, was the Wendigo. It loomed tall and gaunt, its eyes glinting with a predatory hunger. "Help me," it whispered, its voice now a chilling mimicry of the lost. "No," I shouted, shaking my head in disbelief. I had heard the tales. The Wendigo fed on the despair of the lost, luring them with voices of loved ones. I turned to flee, but the shadows twisted around me, freezing me in place. "Join us," it beckoned, the air thick with despair. I could see faces flickering behind it, lost souls, their eyes pleading, their mouths twisted in agony. They were trapped, ensnared by the creature's hunger. I forced myself to move, breaking free from the spell of despair. I sprinted back toward the way I had come, but the forest felt alive, the trees closing in around me. The Wendigo's laughter echoed through the night, a sound that chilled me to the bone. "You cannot escape." I stumbled through the snow, desperate to reach the ranger station, my heart racing with fear. The voices followed me, growing louder, twisting into a haunting chorus. "Help us! Join us!" Finally, I burst through the door of the ranger station, locking it behind me. I leaned against it, breathless, the warmth of the building a stark contrast to the freezing air outside. The whispers lingered, creeping in through the walls, scratching at my sanity. Hours passed, and just when I thought I might be safe, I heard a soft knock on the door. "Help me!" The voice was low and pleading, and my heart sank. I recognized it. It was my sister's voice, who had disappeared years ago. "No," I breathed, shaking my head. I knew it was a trick, but the pain of loss gripped me tightly. "You're not real." "Please, let me in." The voice pleaded again, chilling me to the core. I could feel tears stinging my eyes as I pressed my back against the door. "Stay away," I shouted, gripping my flashlight like a lifeline. "I won't let you take me." The Wendigo's laughter erupted outside, a terrible cacophony that reverberated through the trees. "You are already mine," it howled, and the shadows danced at the edges of my vision. Panic surged through me. I needed a plan. I glanced around the room, searching for something, anything. Then I remembered the lanterns hanging on the walls. Fire was the one thing the Wendigo feared. I grabbed one and rushed to the window, throwing it open. The cold air rushed in, and I could see the creature's shadow flickering in the distance. I lit the lantern and held it high, feeling the warmth spread through my fingers. "Stay back!" I shouted into the darkness. The Wendigo let out a piercing shriek, the sound slicing through the night. "You cannot take me." With a surge of adrenaline, I threw the lantern out into the snow. The glass shattered and flames erupted, casting a warm glow across the clearing. The Wendigo recoiled, its form shifting and twisting as the fire burned brightly. "Fight it!" I yelled, feeling the warmth wash over me, pushing back the shadows. "We are not afraid." As the flames crackled, the faces of the lost souls began to fade, their screams turning to whispers of gratitude. The Wendigo shrieked, its form disintegrating into the night, the shadows retreating before the fire's glow. When the first light of dawn broke, I stepped outside, the warmth of the sun washing over me. The forest was silent now, the whispers gone. I could feel the weight of the lost souls lift, their presence no longer haunting the air. I made my way back to the campers, who had gathered around the remaining fire, their faces pale but relieved. Together, we shared our experiences, the terror of the night still fresh in our minds.